Welcome. This sermon is a pre-recording of a message, a drash that I will be delivering tomorrow on September 6th, 2025, Parshat Tetsteh, to Congregation Kol Emet. So I want to start by thanking Rabbi Booth and Rabbi Graff for the invitation to speak to their community as a memory of my father-in-law, Alfred Goldhaber, whom everyone knew as Fred. I also want to start by saying a special thank you to my sister-in-law, Sarah Goldhaber-Fiebert. Sarah's been planning this Shabbat for quite a while, which is typical of the extraordinary devotion she gave her father. My sister-in-law, Sarah, is an exemplar of Kibud Av V'Em, the mitzvah to honor parents. My father-in-law, Fred Goldhaber, was a physicist, but towards the end of his career, he collaborated with a philosopher, Robert Crease, first to teach a course and then to write a book about the impact of quantum mechanics on our broader culture. His book is called The Quantum Moment. Really well written, an easy read. I highly recommend it. For example, an entire chapter explores the impact on popular culture of a paper published in 1938 by Erwin Schrödinger. That paper included a thought experiment, which he had intended kind of as a joke. Only the joke was later taken very seriously because it demonstrates just how mind-bending quantum mechanics can be. I'm talking, of course, about the famous Schrödinger's cat. Imagine a sealed box with a cat inside. The cat was alive when you saw it go into the box. At that time, the box also contained a sealed vial of poisonous gas and a very small amount of a radioactive material. So small that in the course of an hour, there's about a 50% probability that one of its atoms will decay, releasing a radioactive particle. The probability that nothing will happen. Finally, the box contains a very sensitive Geiger counter, a device that measures radioactivity. The Geiger counter has been jerry-rigged to a hammer so that if it detects a particle, it will release the hammer, match the vial of gas, the poison will be released, and the cat will die. But if there are no particles for the Geiger counter to detect, everything remains as it was when the cat entered the box, and the cat lives. For Schrödinger, this was a joke, because obviously a cat can't be both dead and alive at the same time. Since the cat can't be both dead and alive, the particle that would cause its death cannot be both released from its atom and bound to its atom and has to be in one state or the other. Now, this is a quantum mechanical particle we are talking about, maybe an electron. Far too small for us to actually see and probably to fully comprehend. And 1935 were the early days of quantum mechanics. At that time, Schrödinger, like Einstein, rejected what is now considered fundamental. Today, physicists all agree quantum mechanical particles do exist in multiple states simultaneously. Until we measure its state, that particle is both bound to the atom and not bound to it. So, what about the cat? Every now and then, I try to revisit Schrödinger's puzzle with my personal physics consultant, my husband, David. Invariably, after a couple of minutes of discussion, I notice that the register of my voice is a little higher. I'm leaning forward in my seat. My hands are gesticulating energetically. It's just so darn frustrating. The cat can't be both dead and alive. And my dear, brilliant, unflappable husband, who is quite a bit like his father of blessed memory, responds calmly to each of my questions with totally unsatisfying answers. I wonder if 2,000 years ago, the students of Hillel and Shammai felt the same way. What do you mean we can marry the daughters of the other school? They might feed us unkosher food. Or worse, we might be marrying someone totally forbidden to us. Are our rules for real or not? And I can just imagine the response, especially from Hillel. Ah, my son, the oven is simultaneously pure and impure. This particular union is simultaneously permitted and forbidden, and both are the words of the living God. Now, forgive me if you didn't follow that. Hillel and Shammai were among the founding fathers of Rabbinic Judaism. They lived at the time of the Mishnah, the very beginning of the Talmud. And they disagreed about every detail of Jewish life. But students of their two schools did not hesitate to marry each other. In fact, a heavenly voice once reassured them that, quote, both sides are the words of the living God. One of the most challenging aspects of quantum mechanics is the notion that reality is uncertain. Listen to this description from my father-in-law's book. Quantum mechanics, so quote, quantum mechanics has helped rid philosophy of a Laplacian ideal of knowledge and of the vision of a unified science, of a too narrow conception of phenomena, and of an impossible objectivity. Our world, unlike that of our ancestors, is full of what Updike calls gaps, inconsistencies, warps, and bubbles. As a result, our novelists and poets have to address a reality whose surface is less like the smooth geometry of the Newtonian world and more like that of a kettle of boiling water. Both Laplace and Newton, as members of the Christian gentry, were privileged to live in a fairly smooth, self-consistent world. Not so the great thinkers of Judaism. The Talmud, the book from which nearly all future Jewish thinking emerged, views reality as much more like Updike's post-quantum world of gaps, inconsistencies, warps, and bubbles. In Talmudic thinking, two plainly contradictory opinions can both be true. And that can be a difficult reality to inhabit. If I get frustrated thinking about Schrodinger's cat, how much more so in confronting contradictory ideas that directly impact my life? For anyone who loves Torah as I do, this week's Torah portion is a prime example. Ki Tetsteh include pieces that are the simple, smooth essence of what we think an eternal Torah should be. Here are just a few of many examples. Don't subvert the rights of a foreigner, because remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Don't harvest your crops to completion. Leave anything that you missed during the first sweep for the hungry to come and gather. If you see someone's animal wandering lost, don't avert your eyes. Make the effort to return it to its owner. But Ki Tetsteh also includes pieces that seem to push the ancient world in the right direction and fall short of an eternal ideal. Just one example, you may not execute a child for the crimes of his parents. Good, but why does the Torah view so many offenses as capital crimes? And by the way, this is the same Torah portion that prescribes stoning as the punishment for a wayward child. In fact, Ki Tetsteh contains quite a few flatly appalling pieces like that. Here's just one more that particularly gets me. If a bridegroom accuses his bride of not having been a virgin, the burden of proof falls on her and her family. If they can't prove her virginity, the punishment is stoning. How? This has all got me way more frustrated than Schrodinger's cat. Stoning children and non-virgin brides? Can the Torah be both eternal and not eternal at the same time? Implicitly, the Talmud's answer to that last question is yes. We can hold to the Torah as eternal truth and also allow space for humanity to grow and evolve if we engage with Torah through the lens of Midrash, the Talmudic method of interpretation. Talmudic law includes so many restrictions on when and how capital punishment could be applied, it made it practically obsolete. And this part is critical. The Talmud does not present these restrictions as extra layers added onto the biblical text after the fact. Rather, the rabbis reread the biblical text so that the restrictions emerge from the text itself. The passage about the non-virgin bride includes an additional midrashic twist. The Talmud rereads that passage to make it a case of adultery. The reinterpretation here was so effective. I remember being shocked when, despite having read this passage many times in my life, my study partner a number of years ago first pointed out to me that that's not what the original text seems to say. Now, I still don't like the idea that Judaism views adultery as a capital crime, even theoretically, even with all the rabbinic safeguards against ever actually following through on executions. But it's a lot better than viewing premarital relations as a capital offense. So, warps and inconsistencies. This is how we hold on to our beloved traditions while also creating space for morality to evolve. We learn to dance with warps and inconsistencies. All of rabbinic Judaism is based on this method of interpretation called midrash. The logic of midrash often feels forced, and the ties to the original biblical text often feel very flimsy. But out of this midrashic method, the Talmud built an incredible edifice of ritual and civil law. In a moment of unusual self-disclosure, the Mishnah in Tractate Chagiga describes part of the endeavor like this, quote, "The laws relating to nidarim, vows, are flying in the air with nothing to support them. The laws of Shabbat, festival offerings, and consecrated property are like mountains suspended by a hair," end quote. Now compare that Mishnah to an observation in the final chapter of my father-in-law's book. Again, quote, "The Newtonian world is like a rigid building that floats without a foundation. The quantum world is like a firmly built treehouse connected to the ground, but able to sway in the breeze." Now, I find it very unlikely that either Fred or his co-author had ever seen the Mishnah in Chagiga, but they came up with very similar imagery because it turns out that Talmudic thinking predicted our quantum moment by nearly 2,000 years. Perhaps because the Talmud is not just a scholarly document, it is also a guidebook for life. And every human being is full of gaps, inconsistencies, warps, and bubbles. Our spiritual work is to construct ourselves as a firm, reliable treehouse that does not get frustrated with all of life's swirls and contradictions. My father-in-law was such a person. Fred Goldhaber was a clear, solid thinker and also a flexible one. His book actually gives a satisfying answer to the Schrodinger's cat's paradox. You can ask me about it in Kiddush. He was really good at explaining things, but he was also a patient teacher, accepting of his students' foibles. He was a man of great integrity who also showed respect to every person he encountered. In his memory, may we all be blessed with clear-headed thinking and with the ability to tolerate dissonance. May we be solid in our rejection of injustice and tolerant and patient in our acceptance of one another. Shabbat Shalom.